Hello everyone, Gustavo Mendes here. Now that we have a clip on the timeline and we're seeing here the initial steps of actually seeing our layers and some compares, let's apply a quick DVO to this clip. So I'm just gonna move some of the interface here and let me select here my DVO film and I'm gonna apply clarity to this shot. So as you can see, I can click on the drop down and I can select a variety of plugins here. So I have all my DVOs. I have color tools, color management tools. I have composite modes. I have some image effects. I have some time warps. Transitions, we only have a specific dissolve, but you can use OFX to do others. So for example, you see that right now we're testing some other manufacturers, but you can use Sapphire, for example. And there's quite a lot of options in terms of effects, but let's concentrate on our DVO Clarity. So I'm going to go back to Film, going to find DVO Clarity, and now what we're going to do is let's zoom in and see if I play back. You can see the grain very clearly. It's affecting the shot. I could even do a quick grade, but initially let's just take a look at the original shot. Now that I did a quick check, looked at the level of grains, let's concentrate on the sign. And what I'm going to do is, now that I selected clarity here, I'm going to apply it to this clip. So I'm going to click on this first button. You can see the tooltip that I can apply it to the input effects. What is the input effects? It's the very first render and that we're going to do for our clip. Meaning, first operation that's going to happen, it's always on input effects, and input effects can have multiple tools added to it, and all of them are going to cache at the same time in order from top to bottom. In this case, I'm going to apply just clarity. So I clicked, clarity was just applied, and a few things are happening. I'm going to turn off my background rendering just for a second. I'm going to go here to my cache tab real quick. I'm just going to tell it delete so we can see this with a little bit more time. But what's going to happen is, first of all, clarity was applied. If I double click on it, I can see here under the effects tab all the parameters for that specific tool that I just selected. In this mode right here, I can only see all the tabs and I have to click quite a bit just back and forth to see things, but we can make this a little bit easier. So if I press Control F5, I can do a split view of timeline in the effects section. So you see that we have timeline, source clip, the shots mode, and the keyframe editor, and now here the effect tracker is in detecting caches. So I'm going to click on timeline, so now I can see both of them at the same time. We have, of course, less viewings in real estate, but it's okay for what we're trying to do. So now I have clarity applied, and I can click on enable and disable so we can see the result very easily. You can see here that quite a lot of grain removed, and I'm actually gonna change a little bit of the amount, so this is a little bit stronger. I'm gonna keep the aggressiveness, meaning how it's detecting movement. I'm gonna say I want this a little bit sharper, and you can see the sharpening. If I zoom in, if I go to 1, you're gonna see a little bit of a difference. If I go to 0, you can notice it's a little bit softer. It's hard to see with the compression from the web, but there's a small difference, and it's not made for you to sharpen things aggressively. It's just to give you some of that sharpening back from the texture you removed from the grain management. And you can also see the clarity if I go here to do a fit. I'm going to do a Control Tab. You're going to notice that it's all about grain management. We're not trying to clean up everything. We're just trying to reduce the amount of grain that exists with clarity. So if I press the letter Q, you're going to see that I can go to my original state, to source. And if I press again, I go to output. It's the same as you going here right next to library and MEMS, this drop down. So I can do source, I can play input effects, I can play just the base, an output or a specific layer that's selected. Right now what it's doing is either playing source, and if I press Q, it will go to output. Very easy for you to see the result. Now, if I press play Clarity, it's a very, very heavy plugin. So if I just press play here on my machine, it's cached the whole shot to RAM at this point, but quite the majority, but it is, depending on the resolution, quite heavy. So now that it's probably set up to cache, it's all playing back. But I can also cache this clip. Now, since I'm working on a half-float project, if I go to my caches tab, I can go to my cache format and say what type of half-float caching I can do. I can do EXR uncompressed, I can do PIZ compression, I can do DWAA and DWAB. I'm going to use DWAB because it's very small size files and it's a reasonable compression, and this goes from 0 to 300. I'm going to keep it on 45. And now we have a few buttons up here. So FG, basically if I turn it off, if I try to play, now that it's in memory, it's going to play back, but it tries to render frames moving forward. But if I press BG, this is our background rendering. So I'm going to do G here again, press BG, and you're going to see that it's rendering here. And if I click on library and tasks, you can see the speed of that render. So it's doing around 16 frames a second, and it's done. I'm going to click on F1. I'm going to press F. I'm going to play back. So now we're playing back full screen with clarity applied. And this is perfect, all good to go. And if the result is good, I can just move forward. But actually, this might be too much or too little. Of course, if I change the settings, it's just gonna change it's gonna have to recache. But right now, I don't need to recache. So let's say that input effects is good. So as you can see, this created this green bar instead of the red bar. Green bar means that it's fully rendered. So now what's gonna happen is I could, for example, go to my base layer, select one of the tools. We're gonna talk about the base layer and the color correction layers in a little bit, but I can go to, for example, lift gamma gain, and I can do I'm gonna hold control to make this as a finer adjustment. Gonna move it a little bit here. Let me just do a fit, see where I want this to go. So I just want to neutralize a lot of that magenta color that's there. So if I press Q, this is difference. I'm gonna do everything on one layer. I would normally separate, but let me go here to my contrast. Let me apply quite a lot of contrast. Gonna change my pivot a little bit, so I want it a little bit brighter. I'm also gonna go back to my lift gamma gain now that I have contrast where I want it. I'm gonna change the offset a little bit. I'm gonna push this even further in this direction so I can remove it a little bit more. And now let's apply a little bit. I'm gonna turn on my scopes again. We're gonna talk about all these, but I'm gonna do Parade RGB. Gonna move this all the way down because it's supposed to be a little bit darker, but I do want some highlights there, so I'm doing just a lift gamma gain. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna move my highlights away from that cyan. Gonna get my blacks to a different point here, so I'm still moving things, trying to find a little bit where I want it. Of course, doing this with a panel like a tangent would be easier, but I'm just showing some of the tools real quick. So I'm just gonna again lower this a little bit more. I want this to be a little bit more on the neutral side here. My highlights, I'm okay with them. It's a little bit bluer than I wanted, but I'm just gonna move my blacks a little bit again. And now I could, for example, do a tab again, press play, and we're not processing the actual color grade because this I can play back in real time using the GPU. So, and I already have cache result of the clarity plugin applied. So I can see this with the denoise. Now, if I wanted to basically see this with the grade, and I see that I want this to be a little bit stronger, I could just go back to my input effects, go to clarity and say I want this to be stronger. So it's gonna go back cache it again real quick. And I could change any other settings, but I'm happy with everything else. And I can just go back to the beginning of the clip. Again, I'm going to do a Control Tab so we can keep the interface. I'm going to do a Fit. And we can see here the result of Clarity along with the color grade. So this is an initial setup of just using input effects and selecting any tools you want. In this case, we use Clarity to do a denoise.